the Chase Thomas Podcast, for people who have nothing but time to kill.
6th-year seniors, and you just rode them the whole way. And there's been multiple classes of potential along the offensive line, obviously not high-end recruits, but none of them have seen the light of day so far. So I do agree with you that, like, the guys you recruited, got to see what they're made of. And this seems like a year with a lot of turnover along the offensive line to do that. I know you have the two newcomers who will obviously contribute, but obviously David Sanders needs to be getting a lot of reps. I would expect him to do that. And then, on the interior offensive line, there's going to be some opportunity, specifically at center, more than likely, to see what you got.
Absolutely. The other Tennessee football one that I'm going to throw your way, because I think this is an important one that I want Vol fans to understand. Like, this is ultimately a make or break type deal for the Tennessee offense. And it's
the
Tennessee
stat,
future.
Right?
It's a stat.
Yeah.
And it's Tennessee futures. So do you think true or false here? Or over under, whatever, true or false? Nico Iamaleava finishes next season averaging 10.0 yards per attempt. Are you taking the over under for that?
I'm going to take the under. That would be a 2.5 yards per attempt leap from what he had this year, give or take. He had 7.8 this year, I believe. Yeah, 7.8 yards per attempt for Nico in 2024. So that would be a pretty big jump to go all the way to 10. And I just think you look at Tennessee's wide receiver core, and I don't know if the big play guys are there for Tennessee, for Nico to make that type of jump. And there's a lot of uncertainty, the wide receiver group for Tennessee, a ton of turnover, which I think is a good thing. It's very similar to what we saw from the Tennessee secondary a year ago, where everybody left, but it's probably a good thing because the guys that you had weren't, necessarily living up to expectation, and the wide receiver group wasn't performing like it needed to. So it's a good thing that there's this amount of turnover and that there's this much youth. But when you look at the types of players Tennessee has in its wide receiver room, I don't know if the offense is going to shift that much to involve that the amount of big plays necessary for Nico to reach 10 yards per attempt. It's not a bad thing, but I just don't think that it will be that much of a leap.
I don't either. And I think that's kind of like it's not doom and gloom if he doesn't get to it, but I will say, like, when I was going through just a bunch of numbers in terms of past champs, the lowest yards per attempt for any quarterback who's won a national title in the last 8 years is 8.9 yards per attempt. And that was Michigan 2 years ago with J.J. McCarthy. That was almost 9 yards to attempt. But they also had the number one defense in college football that year. So if you're going to not be a dynamic down the field, big play offense, you better have the best defense in the sport. And I love where Tim Banks and this defense is right now, but do I think they're going to be number one in the country? No. So if you're not going to be number one in the country, you got to make it up on the offensive side. And it's chunk plays. Like, if the chunk plays aren't back, and the guys you mentioned where it's like that kind of big turnover, if Mike Matthews, Braylon Staley, Boo Carter, Chris Brazzell, they don't flip the script and we don't see something, you don't have to be 2022 again, but you do have to have the dynamic pass plays. You have to have more than just relying on Dante Thornton to survive. Like, you can't live in 12 personnel. You can't have a game where Miles Kitselman leads you in receptions and yards, because Tennessee will lose that game every time. They lost to Georgia when that was the case. Like, that's, if you see tight ends leading Tennessee in receiving in the Hype era, guess what? They lost that football game. Just gonna go ahead. Spoiler alert. That's it. The games that Tennessee lost this season, every single one, Tennessee averaged less than 10 yards per reception. That's the other part of it. It's like, if Dante Thornton didn't have a big play, they didn't win the football game, and that was because there was no other answer. So I think it's important. You don't have to get to 10, but that's what Mac Jones had the year he won it at Bama with those studs in 2020. But Joe Burrow right up there, Stetson Bennett, like, even the number one defense, like, they were third in yards per attempt. They were still taking deep shots. They were still hyper aggressive, throwing the ball down the field. If that's not there, like, I think that really limits the ceiling. And I just think then you're looking at 3 out of 5 years of subpar offenses in the Heupel era, and it's just a bad trend on that side of the ball. It's huge. Nico, you got to unload. Nico's got to raise the yards per attempt, and it's not all on Nico, but there's no way around it. Like, the offense has to get back to down the field chunk plays.
And I think it's more likely to be that down the field chunk plays to reach that number than any sort of yak. You mentioned Stetson in there.
Yeah.
Stetson was helped a lot by yak from Bowers and co.
But he was still throwing it. He was aggressive. He was throwing it up, man.
They were, but that's been a big part of the Georgia offense is catch and run.
Yeah.
Even Hendon Hooker, I just looked at the stats in 21 and 22. He's just under 10. So he didn't even reach that.
They were top 10 in scoring both those years.
Right, but you're talking about this number, and
I'm not saying it has to be 10. It has to be like 9+ though. It has to be. Yeah.
I understand what you're saying. And Milton was the almost identical as Nico last year, I believe 7.9 in 23. So it just feels like what Heupel's offense has become, and it's probably to a fault. It's just a lot of quick game, a lot of screens, a lot of around the line of scrimmage, and maybe it's treating Nico with kid gloves a little bit at times last year. I think you'd like to see more trust in Iamaleava in 25, but it feels like there just would have to be a pretty drastic change in Tennessee's passing offense for it to get to that number, or even what Hendon did in 22 and 21.
I don't think it has to be that high, but it has to be close. And I think the other part of it is just you have to, and you hit on it, is you have to let Nico loose. Like, you have 3 scholarship quarterbacks now in that room: redshirt freshman 4-star and Merrick Glinger, true freshman 4-star and George McIntyre. You got to let it rip. Like, last year you had to walk on and gas him more, and I understand, like, you kind of want to be conservative and make sure and pick your spots when you ran Nico, and as a redshirt freshman, getting his feet wet, this and the other. There's just too much on the line, and this is it for Nico. It seems like either way, so you got to let it rip. Like, if you want him to slide, you want him to really work on making sure he's not taking some terrible hits every game. But this offense, I truly, like, we joke in our group chat about it, but I'm like, the offense doesn't work if the quarterback is not going to be able to turn 2nd and 10 into 3rd and 3 when stuff isn't there, and be able to do stuff with his legs. Like, it doesn't work. Like, it just doesn't work. So I think he has to, you got to run him. Like, you're going to be tested right away against Syracuse. You played Georgia early. Like, he's going to have to run. Like, it has to be part of every single big game is Nico Iamaleava using his legs and running often. Like, I don't think there's a way around it. There's a reason Hendon Hooker, it's not just because he was 24 years old. It's because Hendon Hooker was really, really good at knowing when things weren't there and taking off and just making things easier for the offense and just living to fight another down and making things shorter and helping that offense stay on the field longer and 3rd and short all the time.
Yeah, and obviously the last time out, Nico's legs were the only thing working for the Tennessee offense against Ohio State. So maybe that, flips the switch a little bit for Josh Heupel and this offensive staff to realize that they need to incorporate that more in 25. Like you said, though, you got to let it rip. And when you look at it from a big play standpoint, which is what we're talking about here, Tennessee's gotten so many big plays out of the running back position in the last handful of years. It's hard to bank on that happening in 25. Like, Lewis, I mean, it's just not really the style of player he is. Bishop maybe can do it. We'll see what Star Thomas does. He had a couple of explosive plays at Duke last year, but you're not going to get the explosive plays you got out of Sampson last year, and especially not the big runs you got out of Jalen Wright during his time on Rocky Top. So that is largely going away. So you're going to need to bring back those big passing plays, because in 23, you're really relying on big running plays. Same in 24, probably not going to be there this season. So I agree with you. You got to have more explosive passing plays if you want this offense to compete with the best of them and be a championship level offense. It's just going to take a lot, I think, for it to get there.
I agree. I mean, the last 20 champions in the sport were either number 1 in FEI defense or number 1 overall in terms of just combining the offense and the defense. Like, and Tennessee, I don't think the Heupel is going to get number 1 in defense, but I do think they could be somewhere in the top 10. And you thought that the defense would be the harder part to get there. Defense was borderline top 10 in scoring this past year. I think there's a path to them being better in 2025. I think if you just putting in Idris Farouk in the Will Brooks spot and Edwin Spillman in the Keenan Pili spot, I think that there are upgrades there. The Jermon McCoy injury sucks, and I hope he's back and normal and ready to go. But if he is, like, I think you're going to be they don't really rotate there anyway. So I've seen a lot of people are like, oh, what are they going to do? They need another transfer. I'm like, Willie Martinez played Jermod and Ricky Gibson like 70 snaps a game last year.
It's because they're so much better. I just think
McMurray and Gibson are going to play 70 snaps. Like, if Jermod can't go against Syracuse, guess what? They're just going to do those two are just playing 70 snaps, and it's not going to matter.
Well, I think the reports have mostly been positive about McCoy too. I wouldn't be worrying
Yeah.
about him.
And I like
Maybe you
McMurray.
worry about a drop off a little bit just because he was so elite.
Yeah.
And it's tough to come back from an ACL, obviously. But I'm not. There's bigger fish to fry with this Tennessee team than the cornerback position, I should say.
100% agree. Baseball here at Jack Foster. I'm so excited that we get to talk baseball because we're so close to the college baseball season. First thing for you, and I kind of want to soft toss this to Ryan. I don't remember how long ago it was, but Cannon Peebles as the leadoff option, because there's not an obvious leadoff guy for Tennessee right now. It's Jay Abernathy, but throwing that to a true freshman might be a little bit bold early on in the year. Maybe it's something he grows into as the season goes along. But I think there's a real case to make Cannon Peebles the leadoff hitter for Tennessee, at least starting out. What say you?
Okay, I was thinking about this. It makes sense in terms of how great Cannon Peebles at bats were.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's what you're going for here, right?
He's more the OBP guy. Like, I think I'd trust him more than anything else, and he's going to get on base. And
that's
switch hitter.
Point.
Yeah.
Nicely done, nephew. The Chase Thomas podcast. Hell yeah.